hi, it's me, Trooth, the owner and operator of the fictional manga cafe, Trooth's Manga Cafe, and I'm here to make a recommendation for you today of something you can read if you're ever in my imaginary manga cafe. The recommendation I have for today is something that kind of flies under a lot of people's radar, something not super well known, but very beloved for me. We're talking, of course, about Skullface bookseller Honda-san. And wouldn't you know it, this is a series where I own the whole series. Wow! That's right, it's only 4 volumes long. 4 short volumes. Man, I need more bookends if I'm gonna set up my displays like this. Anyway, I said in my Komi video that I don't tend to read a lot of comedy manga, that was something that's kind of outside of my wheelhouse, and I guess this kind of is too. And I now have a 50% rate of reviewing things that are like not in my wheelhouse, so at this rate you're never going to get to really know what I do read on the regular. I'll have to get around to those series one of these days. But basically, Skullface bookseller Honda-san, if you've never heard of it, is about the kind of daily life of a bookseller in Japan, in a bookstore, specifically a manga shop, I guess. I think they have other books too, but specifically in the manga department. And while the manga cafe that I work in might not exist, I still find this kind of story material very relatable. The main character is the self-insert Honda-san, and there's an interesting thing about Honda-san's identity, which, okay, usually I wait until the end to talk about anime adaptations, but it's kind of relevant here. If you happen to have watched the anime adaptation of Skullface bookseller Honda-san, which does exist, it was like a single season of 11-minute episodes, you would probably have noticed that Honda-san is voiced by a man. The same man who voiced Doppio in JoJo Part 5, no less.
信じられねえぜ。こんなところに偶然公衆電話があるなんて。ガチャリ。お電話ありがとうございます。〇〇書店漫画売り場です。
But if you read the manga of Skullface bookseller Honda-san, it kind of becomes evident as you read along that Honda-san is probably a woman in real life. I feel like Volume 4 especially tried to give like a feminine pose to the character. I don't know. But Honda-san's true identity is sort of concealed by drawing, I'm just gonna say herself as a skeleton. I'm assuming Honda is a woman. There's a line, I think, in the 4th volume where she tells an anecdote about crying one time and was saying, oh, my mascara was running. So that's my assumption. So Honda-san draws herself as a skeleton, and all of her co-workers have a similar masked appearance, like one of them has a jack-o'-lantern for a head, one of them has a paper bag over their head, one of them is wearing like a medieval knight's helmet. I guess, you know, it's to protect people's real-life identities. And there's also this kind of, I guess, would you call it censorship of specific manga titles that are referenced throughout this, but if you're someone like me, the imaginary manga cafe employee, who knows a lot about manga and spends every day kind of reading about it and dealing with it, you can kind of pick out what the names are, because in the English translation they usually just censor a single letter of it. It's usually pretty easy to figure out, and in addition to that, in the back of every volume, there are translation notes, and these extensively go over basically every cultural reference on every page, and a lot of these actually print the full version of those censored manga titles. I think it's a thing where in Japan they probably legally have to censor those names, but in the US we don't legally have to censor those, so they're just kind of kept censored for the sake of, like, the artist's original vision, I guess, just like how we don't mirror the artwork anymore. Now, as I see it, the appeals of this manga are basically twofold. You get to learn about the inner workings of a bookstore and kind of what happens in the employee's day-to-day schedule, and it's also just a comedy manga about the kind of funny interactions between employees and customers, or employees and each other. I will say I don't know if it's the most accessible series for somebody who's new to the manga world, because there are definitely a lot of specific references that not everybody would get. And this series kind of speaks to the sort of, I guess, blurring of the lines between manga culture and just general American culture. Because there are definitely, like, a lot of Japanese sort of genre terms. I mean, they'll be talking about shonen and shoujo and yaoi and all kinds of things like that. You know, these Japanese words that a casual American reader might not know offhand. So one of my favorite kind of interactions, you know, one of those kind of employee-customer and employee-employee interactions, one of the characters at one point goes running into the back room and just says, out of nowhere, "A moving shoujo manga, 3 volumes long at most, that even a man in his 40s can enjoy," and is basically just giving the other employees a prompt of, okay, I need a recommendation for this customer. I need to find something that'll fit these specific criteria and get them to walk out of the store with something. The great part is, farther along in the volume, you kind of find the resolution to that kind of recommendation crisis. What did the person who wanted a shoujo manga, no longer than 3 volumes, enjoyable by a 40-year-old man, end up buying? Well, he went with Berserk. And if you know your manga, then that's hilarious. If you don't, you're just kind of like, okay. If that's you, you have to kind of go to the translation note page in the back and be like, ah, yes, the joke has now been explained to me. I appreciate the cultural references. So, if that's kind of the boat you're in, then probably the only gain you would really get out of this series is just kind of learning about the bookstore life and being more educated about the culture, I guess. It kind of feels weird to refer to this as an educational manga, but honestly, I bet that was probably a big factor in what got it translated. I mean, the biggest factor was probably just that it had an anime adaptation that was moderately popular. Not very popular, but I loved it. Because I think if it had to stand up on the strength of the jokes alone, it might not have gotten an English translation, just because so much of it is kind of hard to translate if you're not at all familiar with manga already. Like, 10 years ago, we probably would have never gotten a translation for this. They would never have even considered it. So I think some of the best material in the series is just about those funny interactions in the bookstore. I mean, as somebody who works in a manga cafe, which doesn't exist, I feel like if I were a manga artist, I could write about all kinds of those funny or quirky little interactions. The 3rd volume here had a little story just about this, like, little girl who is about to walk up to the counter when nobody else was in line, but then she sees that there's like a whole queue that you're supposed to walk through in order to get up to the registers, and so she stops and walks all the way through there just to be nice and polite, and everybody thought it was like the funniest and cutest thing in the world when they saw it. I feel like I could just write plenty about things that I've overheard in the manga cafe. Like, the other day, I overheard a couple of young teens in the aisle just looking through things, and one of them, just out of nowhere, looked at Death Note and went, "Everybody who got their start on Death Note is gay now." And I was just like, they what now? Man. Or another more recent one, I was ringing up this girl's purchases at our register. I don't know how other manga cafes work. I think some of them you just check out the manga and return it after you're done reading. But at my imaginary manga cafe, which doesn't exist, you can also buy the manga and take it home. Anyway, so yeah, I was there in the manga cafe ringing up this girl who's probably in her early teens. I saw she was picking up Komi Can't Communicate, which I made a video about previously in this series. And I was like, oh hey, that one's really good, you made a good choice. Are you excited for the TV show coming in October? And she didn't even know about that, but she was like, oh yeah, I love this one. This is the only series that my mother will let me buy. She says, all of these books are just ungodly. And I was just like, oh dear. You have my sympathy, child. But I would wholeheartedly recommend this series to anybody who has a job relating to manga, maybe even just people who work in bookstores in general, because there's a lot of that kind of relatable experience that you'll get. It's kind of fascinating how some of the things that happen here in the US also happen all the way over in Japan. Like when somebody in the store can't find an item, and one of the employees will say something like, oh, you can just order it on Amazon. The other employees will just be like, how can you say such a thing? I thought that was so funny to see in a manga about a bookstore in Japan, that they also have this frustration at Amazon for stealing everybody's business away. I would have to say I probably find this manga more relatable than anybody. Honda-san is probably like my Japanese counterpart. She being somebody who worked in a bookstore in Japan, but specialized in the Western graphic novels. You know, like the big full-color comics that we export, like probably all of your Marvel and DC superheroes and that kind of thing. I, on the other hand, work over in America specializing in manga. I am the one specializing in the media from the other country. Also, here's a fun fact for you. As somebody who knows just a very little Japanese, I appreciate that there is a pun in Honda-san's name. If you look at this name tag, Honda contains the Japanese kanji for the word book. How perfect is that for a bookseller? Do you get it? Now, I might spend most of my time working in my imaginary manga cafe, but I also spend a lot of time in the real bookstores here in the US also. And it's interesting to see just some of the cultural differences between our American bookstores and what a bookstore is like over in Japan. The glimpses that I got through this manga make me really wish I could just fly over there one day and visit one of these bookstores and just see exactly how different they all are. For example, one thing that I've gathered from Skullface bookseller Honda-san is that all of the volumes of manga that come into their store are plastic wrapped, just by default. I don't know if that's the case for all of their books, but for me that's just kind of unthinkable to go into a bookstore and not be able to just pick something up and flip through it as you feel like it. Now, we do sometimes receive some plastic-wrapped volumes of manga in the shipments for the Manga Cafe, but those are always the very adult volumes. They're usually going to have like a lot of nudity. Maybe sometimes just a lot of violence, but usually nudity also. Also, there's a kind of interesting part, I think it's at the end of Volume 1, where Honda is kind of explaining to a customer why it is that Japanese manga only seems to be printed in black and white and almost never has color, whereas American comics and comics from other parts of the world usually have full-color illustrations. And it is kind of interesting. Obviously, the lack of color makes manga volumes more lightweight, makes them cheaper usually. But I think it's also a product of lots of series being made basically by a single person a lot of the time. I mean, with assistance usually, but it's not quite the same as Western comics where they usually have like a whole team working on different aspects of the illustration and storytelling process. But I honestly feel like that is probably a big factor that kept Japanese manga from catching on for so long in the US. We were spoiled for so long with so many full-color comics. Even if you go all the way back to like the 1930s and look at the very oldest Superman and Batman comics, even back then they were in full color and just coming out every week. Whereas the kind of industry standard for manga, to this day, it's still almost always just black and white. It just took us this long to give it a chance. Another thing I kind of liked to read about, this was in Volume 2, was what Honda refers to as book fairs, which are basically just like special promotions that the booksellers get to decide on and set up for themselves. You know, special displays with like signs and recommendations. Now that I own and operate my own manga cafe, you know, I get to make special displays like that myself to, you know, make recommendations to the people that are there in the building. But lately, in the year 2021, when I'm putting out this video, it's been a really difficult process, just because if you, like me, buy a lot of manga in physical media, you'll be noticing this year that we are going through some serious shortages. I've kept this casual stack of Chainsaw Man here on the side of the desk, just because these are so rare in the US at this moment that they're basically worth their weight in gold. I mean, they're not that heavy, but you know what I mean. Like, we just, a few days ago, as of this recording, had a reprint of Volume 1, after having that unavailable for months on end. Who knows when 2 through 5 will become available again. And all of these that I have over on this side, these are also really rare. Die Dark, that's actually a brand new series, doesn't have an anime adaptation or anything, but it's kind of hard to get Volume 1 now. Lots of places are out of stock on that. Basically all of Pun Pun outside of Volume 1, so much of Berserk is in short supply now. It's been a tough time for the manga retailer trying to set up special promotions that don't just disappear in a single day. Anyway, even if you don't feel like collecting these 4 volumes of Skullface Bookseller Honda-san, like I said earlier, it does have an anime adaptation. It's very good. I mean, it doesn't have like spectacular over-the-top animation or anything like that. It's pretty simplistic, and again, the episodes are short, but I feel like the material is funny enough that that alone is enough to carry it and make it really enjoyable. In fact, sometimes I think the more primitive animation can make it even funnier. Also, a fun little fact about the anime, it has this theme song that goes with it that uses the letters ISBN kind of repeated over and over. If you're not in the loop, an ISBN refers to the number that corresponds to each edition of every book. It'll say ISBN right above the barcode of your average book, and it stands for International Standard Book Number, of course. So you should know, if you're going to watch the anime, that it does not cover all 4 of these volumes. I know this is a short series, and the anime doesn't even go all the way to the end. It's probably not even going to get a second season, because honestly, I think it's okay that it doesn't go all the way to the end of the manga. As I'm recording this video, there are currently 2 reviews of the manga on my anime list right now. Neither of the people finished the series, and it's not a long series, as you can see. But if I'm honest, I think the drive of the manga got a little misguided toward the end. I feel like as the volumes go on, it becomes less about the kind of funny day-to-day interactions in the store, and it becomes more about the specific intricacies of how the business works. The bulk of Volume 4, in fact, was about Honda-san taking a tour of a publication office, which wasn't very funny. I'm gonna be honest, it was not very funny at all. It was mostly just going along and be like, ah, how very interesting that this is how this publication company does their business. I have learned so much on my trip here. And there were not a lot of laughs. I will say I collected it all mostly just for the sake of completion. I mean, definitely I love the first 3 volumes, and I'm like, well, how am I gonna just have 1 volume missing from a complete collection? I mean, really. And you know, it's good that the series didn't go on super long and then get milked and just continue shambling along, not being funny anymore. It just kinda became less funny and then just stopped. So, it's perfectly fine. Plus, I think a big impetus for ending the manga is that Honda-san stopped working at the bookstore. So, yeah, it kind of becomes hard to continue your manga about bookstore life when you don't work there anymore. It makes sense. So anyway, if you decide you want to read and collect Skullface Bookseller Honda-san, this is about the only English language format that it's available in. I mean, I'm sure you can buy it digitally, but these are just the paperback volumes that run for about $15 a piece. They're published by Yen Press, which, with this one, I have covered like almost all of the major manga publishers in the US right now. I did Viz for Komi, Kodansha for Vinland Saga, Dark Horse for Berserk. Here's Yen Press, they're another big one. The only one I haven't really touched on yet is Seven Seas, which happened to publish Die Dark here. But I think it will not be long before I do one of theirs. We'll see. A kind of interesting thing about Yen Press, this doesn't really have that much to do with Honda-san in particular, is that they give more detailed, like, content rating information on the back than a lot of the other publishers do. If you look at Viz, for example... Oh god. If you look at Viz, for example, it'll just say rated older teen. But a volume like this from Yen Press will have, like, little letters to kind of indicate why it's rated older teen. Kind of surprises me that Skullface Bookseller Honda-san is older teen, but apparently it's for language and sexual content. Language I think I get. I mean, it definitely, like, discusses some adult topics, but there isn't, like, a lot of sexuality in this book. There aren't, like, sexualized characters. You're not gonna see, like, half-naked people running around. There's, you know, sexual topics of discussion, but not, sexual illustrations. So I find that a little weird, but I guess they're being thorough with their ratings. So there is one very solid recommendation for you, with the number of caveats of you should probably know a bit about manga, it wouldn't hurt to know a bit about retail life, and you might still need to read the translation notes in the back. But anyway, definitely give that one a read, and stay tuned for further manga recommendations on this channel in the future. Here is a list of my Patreon supporters for this channel. If you want to join them and get your name in the credits, there's a link down below. You can also follow me on Twitter and get a lot of, like, casual manga recommendations and silly jokes and funny memes that I share. You can join my Discord server to discuss this manga and so many more. You can follow me on Twitch, where occasionally I stream some games. In the meantime, you know, just subscribe to this channel if this is what you like, and if you do like it, give it a like. Press the like button to like the video that you like. I'm just slowly fading out so that those names have more time to display on the screen. See you next time.